And welcome to Fun Classic Reads. Each month we perform a live read from classic and modern books to bring you a combination of lighthearted laughs and literature. I'm Christie Stratos, historical suspense and historical fantasy author, and my co-host is sci-fi author David M. Kelly.
Hi, everyone.
So tonight we're going to be reading the short story The Adventure of the Six Napoleons by Arthur Conan Doyle, also known as The Six Napoleons. We're going to read it in its entirety. And just so you know, it was just kind of a fun fact. It was originally published in Collier's in the US in 1904, and then in the Strand magazine in England the next month. And then finally, after that, it was collected along with 12 other stories in an anthology you might have heard of, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, and published in 1905. So we're going back to the original Sherlock Holmes, and I think we're going to have just the greatest time doing this, especially the full short story. So welcome to everyone who is coming in. Hi to everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And we just want to take a minute to introduce all of our authors. So we're actually going to just allow them to introduce themselves. And we're so grateful for them being here. So let's get started with Anne Charles. We're super excited to have you here. Anne, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Anne Charles. Wow, I've been writing for a long time now. I was going to say the year, but boy, that really ages me. I write mysteries with all kinds of mixed genre, a lot of adventure. What else? Supernatural. I love to dabble with ghosts and other kinds of creatures. And I have 5 different series that I'm currently working on. So juggling, but I don't juggle very well. So it takes me a little while to go from one series to the next. But I'm currently working on the 14th book in my Deadwood Mystery series.
Yeah, Anne is prolific, and she really writes a lot of different kinds of things. I think all under the same general subgenre, but also different branches of it. Am I right?
Yeah. There's one series has no supernatural. It's action adventure, kind of mystery, of course, a lot of humor. All the books have humor. That's kind of where I hang out in. And they're all connected in different ways. So it's kind of tricky sometimes to balance the ones without supernatural when some of the characters cross over into, back and forth between the worlds. But it's fun.
Yeah, that's great. So glad you're here with us.
Thanks.
Next, let's introduce Ian. And he is actually not an author. He is a completely different type of creative. So please introduce yourself, Ian.
Hi, my name is Ian Lasky. I'm an actor in LA, and I just absolutely love authors. I've always wanted to be one myself, but I just never could have the I don't know if it's the discipline or whatever it is. Just something. I just love being creative and in a different way, and and I take different types of classes to support that. I do stand-up comedy in LA, and I call it Cleanish Comedy if anyone wants to follow that. You can also follow me at Ian Lasky, or take a look at my IMDb. I am also the great-grandson of Jesse Lasky, who founded Paramount, and that's kind of my family's claim to fame.
Wow.
Very cool.
So yeah, fun fact, when I told my family when I was really young I wanted to be an actor and not a producer, they were horrified. You want to be a what? An actor? Don't you know they don't make a lot? And so so then I became a teacher, and so I guess I carried on the tradition of not making any money, but but that's just kind of me in a nutshell. And I'm really looking forward to bringing Lestrade to life. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, Ian. Very exciting. And last but
Hey,
certainly not
Ian,
least,
just sorry, before we move on, Chris, Ian, if you're looking for any kind of like, movie kind of plots, I'm sure
yeah.
Bill here wouldn't mind helping.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah. Every week I take I do like improv classes and like singing classes and stuff. And it's always good to keep your I guess your axe sharpened, I guess is the kind of word I'm looking for. Like whatever it is you need to do to sharpen your skills and do it, you should just do it. And so it's just a lot of fun. You have my name misspelled. There's no E in the last name.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
very sorry.
Yeah. But other than that, no, it's been yeah. I would love any type of reference you would give.
Fantastic. All right. Well, last but not least, Jason, who was either, I believe you were on Lurking for Legends when we were doing that show. So, you're sort of returning to the new show.
Yeah, I believe I was your last episode with that. It was
Perfect.
Richard's semi-retirement hiatus.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I've been writing also for what seems like forever, ever since high school, I guess. But my first novel came out back in 2013. Generally, I guess I should say up to this point, it's all been science fiction, but I'm trying to branch out a little bit. I have a murder mystery I've been working on for many years now, which I've determined needs to go through at least one more revision. And I'm also kind of branching out into like alt history, steampunk kind of stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, my most recent novel, The Rise and Fall of Chaz Oregano, just came out last year. And I also have several audiobooks available now.
Wow, congrats.
Cool.
Nice. That's fantastic. Good stuff there. And Dave, I realized that we never really introduced ourselves past me saying that you're a sci-fi author. So did you want to take a second to introduce yourself?
There's not really much else to say, to be honest.
So you do sci-fi? Oh my God, I love sci-fi.
Yeah, I'm David Kelly. I write usually fairly kind of realistic science fiction, although I do have one series which is just completely stupid and silly, which I wrote as light entertainment, mostly for myself. I've got 8 novels out at the moment. I'm working on my 9th currently, which is now just shy of 90,000 words and not showing any signs of stopping. So
Nice.
I think this one's going to be a bit of a long one.
Wow, that's great.
Other than that, I'm just kind of completely addicted to sort of like science and engineering and science news, and have been since I was a young kid. So it's like I've usually got my head stuck in some kind of scientific or engineering type news feed somewhere. What about yourself, Christie? Tell us about you.
All right. Well, I'm Christie Stratos, and as I said, I'm historical fantasy and historical suspense, and I write in the Victorian era. So I do 19th century, mostly mid 19th century United States, which is a little bit different than what is typically expected. It's usually in England, but I really love researching, the U.S. It's kind of funny because you'd think, oh, well, she probably researches where she lives and write about that. No, for some reason, I have this bizarre connection to Boston, which I've never been to. So that's where my historical fantasy series is based wholly. And I actually have so much fun researching it since it's such a historical city. And of course, the entire, state is loaded with historical details that I love. So that is my main series there that I've been writing is the Grimoire Society of Dark Acts. Right now it is on Kindle Vella, which if you're not familiar is a serialized fiction. So you can read the first 10 episodes for free. And then, you continue reading the episodes. I do plan to bring them to paperback and regular Kindle, so that everybody can read them. So it does sound like a good reason for a road trip, Antonio,
Wow.
right? I should. And the other things I do are historical suspense. I have 2 novels published and a number of short stories in historical suspense. I love that. That is usually like an any town type of thing, and just historically accurate to the time period in general. So I love writing anything that's a little bit dark. But if you are looking for something with some, some lightheartedness, a little bit of humor, that's more of my historical fantasy. And I'm also an editor, so you can check me out at proofpositivepro.com if you have any manuscripts that need editing. I love working with my clients. I have a lot of fun with it. So that is me in a nutshell. And now, before we get started, we just want to give each person the opportunity to share any events, any books you're writing, any publication dates that you have coming, so everybody can know what we're all up to. So let's start one more time with you, Anne.
Well, I guess I already gave that away. Like I said, I'm working on Deadwood 14. We did just release a little over a month ago the 5th book in the Deadwood Undertaker series, which is historical mixed with mystery and supernatural and adventure and all kinds of fun stuff. So that book, Hip Deep in Bad Company, we're still kind of doing the last little bits of promotion for that. And then this 14th book should be out late October, November, if things go as planned. And I also have the first book in that Deadwood series. I actually am working with a publisher, and we're putting out the first book again as a hardback, new, updated, limited edition, fancy thing. It's going to be really cool. So that'll be out just in time for Christmas.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Excellent. With so many series, you must have to really coordinate things. I'm sure.
Oh, it's yeah, it keeps me happy, that's for sure. And we, of course, audiobooks we have for all the different series. So lining that up too, that's always a little bit of juggling as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's quite a lot, all the series and the, each form of publishing. Yeah. That's great. Right. So lots of good stuff coming up for you.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. How about you, Ian?
Well, I when I'm not performing at the Day of Comedy, which is a comedy studio in LA, I perform like sketch comedy at UCB on Franklin in LA. And I usually, if you want to, if you're not anywhere near there and you want to just see some of the things I do, I'll post some of my videos, comedy videos, as well as little karaoke sessions and stuff on my Facebook, Ian Lasky. Ian Jesse Lasky is my Facebook. And so that's kind of what I've got going on. I was just in the Clean Comedy Challenge in Alabama, so I was really happy. I got to meet a bunch of comedians and working comics. It was a lot of fun.
That's great.
That's what I've got going on.
Fantastic. And how about you, Jason?
So I have just sold out of my the last copies I have of the second edition of my first novel, The Zimmer Insurgency.
Great.
And before I re-release it, I'm going to re-release it in a slightly different size because it was a pocket book before, mass market pocket book. I'm going to make it slightly bigger with a larger font size now. But I also need to do a few just typo corrections because this was my first novel and I did not have an editor back then, which I discovered when I did the audiobook for it at the end of last year. So I'm just currently reading through that and kind of changing the single words here and there. So that'll be coming out soon. You can look forward to that at future book shows or just on my website. I also have a very short volume called Attila the Valley Girl, which is kind of a comedic I'm kind of taking an episode from history that didn't actually happen but could have fit in there nicely. And I'm just kind of rewriting it so that Attila the Hun is, a complete dressed in pink, blonde hair Valley Girl, and just having all fun with that. And that should be coming out middle of September.
The introduction to your alternate history type of stuff, right?
Yeah, great. Exactly.
I love it. Fantastic. Well, without further ado, David, unless I missed something. Anything?
I don't think so, apart from I need to just do some slight modifications.
Okay, we are going to do costume changes for those of us who are doing costumes. I will be a minute. I hope you can carry on by yourselves for just 1 minute. Oh, very nice, Watson. Very nice. I'll be back.
Perfect.
The costume changes are always the worst. Luckily, this time I've only got one character, which is a blessing, because sometimes, like the last couple, we've had some seriously wicked costume changes. The Count of Monte Cristo was probably the worst. There are so many characters in the Count of Monte Cristo, and Christie actually did a count, and there was no scene, in actual fact, where there was less than, I think it was 22 characters appearing. So we were all doing 4 and 5 different characters in the read. That was some serious fun.
Let's see.
This, let's see if this.
Why, thank you, Antonio.
Gets me into it.
I'm supposed to be a man, I know.
Oh,
But I just have one problem in that I'm not. So I thought I'm going to be a kind of a female news reporter, for my little
hey,
small role.
Anne, this is the Victorian age. We don't worry about such things.
Okay. So Ms. Horace Harker is what will be.
Oh, dear.
Oh,
Sherlock!
nice.
Hello, everyone!
Oh, the deerstalker
went-
and everything.
Yeah. I went hard on this
So-
one. Oh, and I love your hat.
Thank you.
It's so cool. Yeah.
I
Yeah, it's
thought this
fantastic.
would. I thought this would capture Lestrade. Kind of a la Chicago. I guess is the 1930 Chicago. But that's okay.
It works. It works. And the feathers and everything. That is so cute.
I think I keep breathing them. I keep finding them all over the desk. So if I sneeze,
I love the hat. I just love the feathers and the green and the It's like
great.
it looks like something out of the 30s. I like it.
My sister loves to shop at thrift stores, and she sends me hats all the time. I have probably 20 hats now that she's found. This is one of them. So it makes fun. A lot of the podcasts I do, it makes it more fun, I think, if wearing different hats.
I think so. That is a lot of fun. Cool. Okay.
And so,
all
the
set?
case of the Six Napoleons.
Mm.
It was no very unusual thing for Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard to look in upon us of an evening, and his visits were welcome to Sherlock Holmes, for they enabled him to keep in touch with all that was going on at the police headquarters. In return for the news which Lestrade would bring, Holmes was always ready to listen with attention to the details of any case upon which the detective was engaged, and was able occasionally, without any active interference, to give some hint or suggestion drawn from his own vast knowledge and experience. On this particular evening, Lestrade had spoken of the weather and the newspapers. Then he had fallen silent, puffing thoughtfully on his cigar. Holmes looked keenly at him.
Anything remarkable on hand?
Oh no, Mr. Holmes. Nothing very particular.
Then tell me about it.
Well, Mr. Holmes, there's no denying that there's something on my mind, and yet it's such an absurd business that I hesitated to bother you about it. But on the other hand, although it is trivial, it is something undoubtedly strange, and I know that you have a taste for all of that is out of the common. But in my opinion, it comes in more Dr. Watson's line than ours.
Disease?
Madness, anyhow. And a strange madness, too. You wouldn't think there is anyone living at this time of day who had such a hatred of Napoleon the First, and that he would break any image of him that could see.
That's no business of mine.
Exactly. This is why I said, but then, when the man commits burglary in order to break images which are not his own, it brings away the sort from the doctor onto the policeman.
Burglary? That is more interesting. Let me hear the details.
Well, let's see. The first case reported was about 4 days ago. It was at the shop of Morris Hudson, who had a place for the sale of pictures and statues on Kennington Road. The assistant had left the front shop for an instant when he heard a crash, and hurrying he found the plaster burst of Napoleon, which stood for several other works of art upon the counter, lying shivered into fragments. He rushed into the road, but although several passers-by declared that they had noticed a man run out of the shop, he neither could see anyone nor he could find any means of identifying the rascal. It seemed that one of those senseless acts of hooliganism which occur from time to time, and it was reported to the constable and the beat as such. The plaster cast was not worth more than a few shillings, and the whole affair appeared to be too childish for any particular investigation. The second case, however, was more serious and more singular. It only occurred last night. In Kennington Road, and within a few hundred yards of Morris Hudson's shop, there lives a well-known practitioner named Dr. Barnicot, who has one of the largest practices south side of the Thames. His residence and principal consulting room on Kensington Road, but he had always a branch surgery and a dispensary in the lower Brixton Road, 2 miles away. This Dr. Barnicot is not an enthusiastic admirer of Napoleon, and his house is so full of books and pictures and relics of the French emperor. But some time ago, he purchased from Morris Hudson 2 duplicate plaster casts on the famous head of Napoleon by the French sculptor Divine. One of these he placed in the house at Kensington Road, and on the other on the mantelpiece of the surgery in Lower Brixton. Well, when Dr. Barnicot came home this morning, he was astonished to find that his house had been burglared that night. But nothing had been taken from the plaster head of the all. So it had been carried out and had been dashed savagely against the garden wall, under which its splintered fragments were discovered.
This certainly is very novel.
I thought it would please you. But I have not got to the end yet. Dr. Barnicot was due surgery at 12 o'clock, and you can imagine his amazement when, on arriving there, he found the window, and they had been that the window had been opened in the night, and broken pieces of the second bust were strewn out all over the room. It had been smashed to atoms where it stood. In neither case were there any signs that it could give us a clue to the criminal or the lunatic who had done the mischief. Now, Mr. Holmes, you have got the facts.
They are singular, not to say grotesque. May I ask whether the 2 busts smashed in Dr. Barnicot's rooms were the exact duplicates of the one which was destroyed in Morse Hudson's shop?
They were taken from the same mold.
Such a fact must tell against the theory that the man who breaks them is influenced by any general hatred of Napoleon. Considering how many hundreds of statues of the great emperor must exist in London, it is too much to suppose that a coincidence as that a promiscuous iconoclast should chance to begin upon 3 specimens of the same bust.
Well, I thought as you do, and on the other hand, this Morris Hudson is the purveyor of busts in that part of London. And these 3 were the only ones that had been in the shop for years. So, although, as you say, there are many hundreds of statues in London, it is very probable that there was only the only ones in the district. Therefore, a local fanatic would begin with them. What do you think, Dr. Watson?
Well, there are no limits to the possibilities of monomania. There is a condition which the modern French psychologists have called the idée fixe, which may be trifling in character and accompanied by complete sanity in every other way. The man who had read deeply about Napoleon or who had possibly received some hereditary family injury through the Great War might conceivably form such an idée fixe and under its influence be capable of any fantastic outrage.
That won't do, my dear Watson, for no amount of idée fixe would enable your interesting monomaniac to find out where these busts were situated.
Well, how do you explain it?
I don't attempt to do so. I would only observe that there is a certain method in the gentleman's eccentric proceedings. For example, in Dr. Barnicot's hall, where a sound might arouse the family, the bust was taken outside before being broken, whereas in the surgery, where there was less danger of an alarm, it was smashed where it stood. The affair seems absurdly trifling, and yet I dare call nothing trivial when I reflect that some of my most classic cases have had the least promising commencement. You remember, Watson, how the dreadful business of the Abernethy family was first brought to my notice by the depth which the parsley had sunk into the butter upon a hot day. I can't afford, therefore, to smile at your 3 broken busts, Lestrade, and I shall be very much obliged if you will let me hear of any fresh development of so singular a chain of events.
The development for which my friend had asked came in a quicker and infinitely more tragic form than he could have imagined. I was still dressing in my bedroom next morning when there was a tap at the door, and Holmes entered, a telegram in his hand.
Come instantly, 131, Pitt Street, Kensington, Lestrade.
What is it then?
Don't know. May be anything. But I suspect it is the sequel of the story of the statues. In that case, our friend, the image breaker, has begun operations in another quarter of London. There's coffee on the table, Watson, and I have a cab at the door.
In half an hour, we had reached Pitt Street, a quiet little backwater just beside one of the briskest currents of London life. Number 131 was one of a row, all flat-chested, respectable, and most unromantic dwellings. As we drove up, we found the railings in front of the house lined by a curious crowd. Holmes whistled.
By George, it's attempted murder at the least. Nothing else, nothing less would hold the London message boy. There's a deed of violence indicated in that fellow's round shoulders and outstretched neck. What's this, Watson? The top steps swilled down and the other one's dry? Footsteps enough, anyhow. Well, there's Lestrade at the front window, and we shall soon know all about it.
The official received us with a very grave voice and showed us into a sitting room, where an exceedingly unkempt and agitated elderly man, clad in a flannel dressing gown, was pacing up and down. He was introduced to us as the owner of the house, Mr. Horace Harker of the Central Press Syndicate. Ms.
It is the Napoleon bust business again. You seemed interested last night, Mr. Holmes, so I thought perhaps you'd be glad to present now the affair that has taken so much of a graver turn.
What has it turned to, then?
To murder, Mr. Harker. Will you tell these gentlemen exactly what has occurred?
The lady in the dressing gown turned upon us with a most melancholy face.
It's an extraordinary thing that all my life I've been collecting other people's news, and now that a real piece of news has come my way, I am so confused and bothered that I can't put 2 words together. If I had come in here as a journalist, I should have interviewed myself and had 2 columns in every evening paper. As it is, I'm giving away valuable copy by telling my story over and over to a string of different people, and I can make no use of it myself. However, I've heard your name, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and if you'll only explain this strange business, I shall be paid for my trouble in telling you the story. It all seems to center around that bust of Napoleon, which I bought for this very room about 4 months ago. I picked it up cheap from Harding Brothers, 2 doors down from the High Street station. A great deal of my journalistic work is done at night, and I often write until the early morning. So it was today. I was sitting in my den, which is at the back of the top of the house, about 3 o'clock, when I was convinced that I heard some sounds downstairs. I listened, but they were not repeated, and I concluded that they came from outside. Then suddenly, about 5 minutes later, there came a most horrible yell, the most dreadful sound, Mr. Holmes, that I ever heard. It will ring in my ears as long as I live. I sat frozen with horror for a minute or two. Then I seized the poker and went downstairs. When I entered this room, I found the window wide open, and I at once observed that the bust was gone from the mantelpiece. Why any burglar should take such a thing passes my understanding, for it was only a plaster cast and of no real value whatever. You can see for yourself that anyone going out through that open window could reach the front doorstep by taking a long stride. This was clearly what the burglar had done, so I went round and opened the door. Stepping out into the dark, I nearly fell over a dead man who was lying there. I ran back for a light, and there was the poor fellow, a great gash in his throat, and the whole place swimming in blood. He lay on his back, his knees drawn up, and his mouth horribly opened. I shall see him in my dreams. I had just time to blow out on my police whistle, and then I must have fainted, for I knew nothing more until I found the policeman standing over me in the hall.
Well, who was the murdered man?
There's nothing to show who he was. You shall see the body at the mortuary, but we've made nothing of it until now. He is a tall man, sunburned, very powerful, and not more than 30. He was poorly dressed, and yet does not appear to be a laborer. The horn-handled clasp knife was lying in a pool of blood beside him. Whether it was the weapon or which did the deed, or whether it belonged to the dead man, I do not know. There is no name in his clothing, and nothing in his pockets save an apple, some string, a shilling map of London, and a photograph. Here it is.
It was evidently taken by a snapshot from a small camera. It represented an alert, sharp-featured simian man with thick eyebrows and a very peculiar projection of the lower part of the face, like the muzzle of a baboon.
And what became of the bust?
We had news of it just before you came. It had been found in the front garden of an empty house in Campden, House Road. It was broken into fragments, so now I'm going to go see it. Will you come?
Certainly. I must just take one look around. The fellow had either very long legs or was a most active man. With an area beneath, it was no mean feat to reach that window ledge and open that window. Getting back was comparatively simple. Are you coming with us to see the remains of your bust, Mr. Harker?
I must try and make something of it, though I have no doubt that the first editions of the evening papers are out already with full details. It's like my luck. You remember when the Stand fell at Doncaster? Well, I was the only journalist in the Stand, and my journal the only one that had no account of it, for I was too shaken to write it. And now I'll be too late with the murder done on my own doorstep.
As we left the room, we heard his pen traveling shrilly over the foolscap. The spot where the fragments of the bust had been found was only a few hundred yards away. For the first time, our eyes rested upon this presentment of the great emperor, which seemed to raise such frantic and destructive hatred in the mind of the unknown. It lay scattered in splintered shards upon the grass. Holmes picked up several of them and examined them carefully. I was convinced from his intent face and his purposeful manner that at last he was upon a clue.
Well?
We have a long way to go yet. And yet, well, we have some suggestive facts to act upon. Possession of this trifling bust was worth more in the eyes of this strange criminal than a human life. That is one point. Then there is the singular fact that he did not break it in the house or immediately outside the house, if to break it was his sole object.
He was rattled and bustled by the meeting by this other fellow. He hardly knew what he was doing.
Well, that's likely enough. But I wish to call your attention very particularly to the position of this house, in the garden of which the bust was destroyed.
It was an empty house, so he knew he wouldn't be disturbed in the garden.
Yes, but there is another empty house farther up the street, which he must have passed before he came to this one. Why did he not break it there? Since it is evident that every yard that he carried it increased the risk of someone meeting him.
I give it up.
He could see what he was doing here, and he could not there. That was his reason.
By Jove, that's true. Now that I come to think of it, Dr. Barnicot's bust was broken not far from his red lamp. Well, Mr. Holmes, what are we to do with that fact?
To remember it, to docket it. We may come on something later which will bear upon it. What steps do you propose to take now, Lestrade?
The most practical way of getting at it, in my opinion, is to identify the dead man. There should be no difficulty about that. When we have found who he is and where his associates are, we should have a good start in learning what he was doing in Pitt Street last night, and who it was who bet him and killed him on the doorstep of Mr. Horace Archer. Don't you think so?
No doubt. And yet it is not quite the way in which I should approach the case.
What would you do then?
Oh, you must not let me influence you in any way. I suggest that you go on your line and I on mine. We can compare notes afterwards, and each will supplement the other.
Very good.
If you're going back to Pitt Street, you might see Mr. Horace Harker. Tell him for me that I have quite made up my mind, and that it is certain that a dangerous homicidal lunatic with Napoleonic delusions was in the house last night. It will be useful for his article.
You don't seriously believe that?
Don't I? Well, perhaps I don't, but I am sure that it will interest Mr. Horace Harker and the subscribers of the Central Press Syndicate. Now, Watson, I think that we shall find that we have a long and rather complex day's work before us. I should be glad, Lestrade, if you could make it convenient to meet us at Baker Street at 6 o'clock this evening. Until then, I should like to keep this photograph found in the dead man's pocket. It is possible that I may have to ask your company and assistance upon a small expedition which will have been undertaken tonight. If my chain of reasoning should prove to be correct. Until then, goodbye and good luck.
Sherlock and I walked together to the High Street, where we stopped at the shop of Harding Brothers, whence the bust had been purchased. A young assistant informed us that Mr. Harding would be absent until afternoon, and that he was himself a newcomer who would give us no information. Holmes' face showed his disappointment and annoyance.
Well, we can't expect to have it all our own way, Watson. We must come back in the afternoon, if Mr. Harding will not be here until then. I am, as you have no doubt surmised, endeavoring to trace these busts to their source, in order to find if there is not something peculiar which may account for their remarkable fate. Let us make for Mr. Morse Hudson of the Kennington Road and see if he can throw any light upon the problem.
A drive of an hour brought us to the picture dealer's establishment. He was a small, stout man with a red face and a peppery manner.
Yes, sir, on my very counter, sir. What we pay rates and taxes for, I don't know, when any ruffian can come in and break one's goods. Yes, sir, it was I who sold Dr. Barnicot his 2 statues. Disgraceful, sir. A nihilist plot. That's what I make of it. No one but an anarchist would go about breaking such statues. Red Republicans, that's what I call them. Who did you get these statues from? I don't see what that has to do with it. Well, if you really want to know, I got them from Gelder & Co. in Church Street, Stepney. They are a well-known house in the trade and have been this way for 20 years. How many had I? 3. 2 and 1 are 3. 2 of Dr. Barnicot's, and 1 smashed in broad daylight on my own counter. Do I know that photograph? No, I don't. Yes, I do, though. Why, it's Beppo. He's a kind of Italian piecework man who made himself useful in the shop. He could carve a bit, gild and frame, do odd jobs. That fellow left me last week, and I've heard nothing of him since. No, I don't know where he came from, nor where he went. I had nothing against him while he was here. He was gone 2 days before the bust was smashed.
Well, that's all we could reasonably expect from Morse Hudson. We have this Beppo as a common factor, both in Kennington and in Kensington, so that it is worth a 10-mile drive. Now, Watson, let us make for Gelder & Co. of Stepney the source and origin of the busts. I shall be surprised if we don't get some help down there.
In rapid succession, we pass through the fringe of fashionable London. Hotel London, theatrical London, literary London, commercial London, and finally maritime London, till we came to a riverside city of 100,000 souls, where the tenement houses swelter and reek with the outcasts of Europe. Here, in a broad thoroughfare, once the abode of wealthy city merchants, we found the sculpture works for which we searched. Outside was a considerable yard full of monumental masonry. Inside was a large room in which 50 workers were carving and molding. The manager, a big blonde German, received us civilly and gave a clear answer to all Holmes' questions. A reference to his book showed that hundreds of casts had been taken from a marble copy of Divine's Head of Napoleon, but that the 3 which had been sent to Morse Hudson a year or so before had been half a batch of 6, the other 3 being sent to Harding Brothers of Kensington. There was no reason why those 6 should be different from any of the other casts. He could suggest no possible cause why anyone should wish to destroy them. In fact, he laughed at the idea. Their wholesale price was 6 shillings, but the retailer would get 12 or more. The cast was taken in 2 molds from each side of the face, and these 2 profiles of plaster of Paris were joined together to make the complete bust. The work was usually done by Italians in the room where we were in. When finished, the busts were put on the table in the passage to dry and afterwards stored. That was all he could tell us. But the production of the photograph had a remarkable effect upon the manager. His face flushed with anger and his brows knotted over his blue Teutonic eyes.
Ah, the rascal. Yes, indeed, I know him very well. This has always been a respectable establishment, and the only time that I have ever seen the police in here was over this very fellow. It was more than a year ago now. He knifed another Italian in the street, and then came into the works with the police on his heels, and he was taken here. Beppo was his name. The second name I never knew. Serve me right for engaging a man with such a face. But he was a good workman, one of the best.
What did he get?
The man lived and he got off with a year. I have no doubt he is out now, but he has not dared show his face or nose here. We have a cousin of his here, and I dare say he could tell you where he is at.
No, not a word to the cousin. Not a word, I beg of you. The matter is very important, and the farther I go with it, the more important it seems to grow. When you referred to your ledger to the sale of those costs, I observed that the date was June 3rd of last year. Could you give me the date when Beppo was arrested?
I could tell you roughly by the pay list. Yes. He was paid last on May 20th.
Thank you. I don't think that I need intrude upon your time and patience anymore.
With a last word of caution that he should say nothing as to our researches, we turned our faces westward once more. The afternoon was far advanced before we were able to snatch a hasty luncheon at a restaurant. A newsbill at the entrance announced Kensington outrage, murder by a madman, and the contents of the paper showed that Mrs. Horace Harker had got her account into print after all. 2 columns were occupied with a highly sensational and flowery rendering of the whole incident. Holmes propped it against the queer stand and read it while he ate. Once or twice he chuckled.
This is all right, Watson. Listen to this. It is satisfactory to know that there can be no difference of opinion upon this case, since Lestrade, one of the most experienced members of the official force, and Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the well-known consulting expert, have each come to the conclusion that the grotesque series of incidents which have ended in so tragic a fashion arise from lunacy rather than from deliberate crime. No explanation save mental aberration can cover the facts. The press, Watson, is a most valuable institution if you only know how to use it. And now, if you have quite finished, we will hark back to Kensington and see what the manager of Harding Brothers has to say on the matter.
The founder of that great emporium proved to be a brisk, crisp little person, very dapper and quick, with a clear head and a ready tongue.
Yes, sir. I have already read the account in the evening papers. Ms. Horace Harker is a customer of ours. We supplied her with the bust some months ago. We ordered 3 busts of that sort from Gelder & Co. of Stepney. They are all sold now. To whom? Oh, I dare say by consulting our sales book, we could easily tell you. Yes, we have the entries here. 1 to Ms. Harker, you see, 1 to Mr. Josiah Brown of Laburnum Lodge, Laburnum Vale, Cheswick, and 1 to Mr. Satterford of Lower Grove Road, Reading. No, I have never seen this face which you show me in the photograph. You would hardly forget it, would you, sir? For I have seen an uglier. Have you any Italians on the staff? Yes, we have several among our work people and cleaners. I dare say we might get a peep of the sales book if you wanted to. There is no reason for keeping a watch upon the book. Well, it's a very strange business. I hope that you will let me know if anything comes upon your inquiries.
Holmes had taken several notes during Mr. Harding's evidence, and I could see that he was thoroughly satisfied by the turn which affairs were taking. He made no remark, however, save that unless we hurried, we should be late for our appointment with Lestrade. Sure enough, when we reached Baker Street, the detective was already there, and we found him pacing up and down in a fever of impatience. His look of importance showed that his day's work had not been in vain.
Well, what luck, Mr. Holmes?
Well, what luck, Mr. Holmes, indeed.
Well, what luck, Mr. Holmes?
We have had a very busy day, and not entirely a wasted one. We have seen both the retailers and also the wholesale manufacturers. I can trace each of the busts now from the beginning.
The busts. Well. You have your own methods, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and it is not for me to say a word. It's not for me to say a word against them, but I think I have done a day's work better than you. I have identified the dead man.
You don't say so?
Yeah, and found a cause for the crime.
Splendid.
We have an inspector who makes a specialty of Saffron Hill and Indian Quarter. Well, this dead man had some Catholic embolism around his neck, and that, along with his color, made him think that he was from the South. Inspector Hill knew that from the moment he caught sight of him. His name is Pietro Venucci from Naples, and he's one of the greatest cutthroats in London. He is connected with the mafia, which, as you know, is a secret political society enforcing its decrees by murder. Now, you see ours affair begins to clear up. The other fellow is probably an Italian also, and a member of the mafia. He has a broken pipes in some fashion. Pietro is set upon his track. Probably the photograph we found in his pocket is the man himself. So he may not knife the wrong person. He dodges the fellow and he sees him enter a house, but he waits for him, and in the scuffle he receives his own death wound. How is that, Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
Excellent, Lestrade, excellent. I didn't quite follow your explanation of the destruction of the busts.
The busts! You can never get those busts out of your head. After all, that is nothing. Petty larceny, 6 months at the most. It is the murder that we really are investigating, so I tell you that I am gathering all of the threads into my hands.
And the next stage?
It's a very simple one. I'll go down to the Italian Quarter and find a man whose photograph we have got, and arrest him on the charge of murder. Will you come with us?
I think not. I fancy we can attain our end in a simpler way. I can't say for certain, because it all depends. Well, it all depends upon a factor which is completely outside our control. But I have great hopes. In fact, the betting is exactly 2-1. That if you will come with us tonight, I shall be able to help you to lay him by the heels.
In the Indian Quarter.
I fancy Chiswick is an address. No, I fancy Chiswick is an address which is more likely to find him. If you will come with me to Chiswick tonight, Lestrade, I'll promise to go to the Italian Quarter with you tomorrow, and no harm will be done by the delay. And now, I think that a few hours' sleep would do us all good, for I do not propose to leave before 11 o'clock, and it is unlikely that we shall be back before morning. You'll dine with us, Lestrade, and then you are welcome to the sofa until it is time for us to start. In the meantime, Watson, I should be glad if you would ring for an express messenger, for I have a letter to send, and it is important that I should go at once.
Holmes spent the evening in rummaging among the files of the old daily papers with which one of our lumber rooms was packed. When at last he descended, it was with triumph in his eyes, but he said nothing to either of us as to the result of his searches. For my own part, I had followed step by step the methods by which he had traced the various windings of his complex case, and though I could not yet perceive the goal which we would reach, I understood clearly that Holmes expected this grotesque criminal to make an attempt upon the 2 remaining busts, one of which I remembered was at Chiswick. No doubt the object of our journey was to catch him in the very act, and I could not but admire the cunning with which my friend had inserted a wrong clue in the evening paper, so as to give the fellow the idea that he could continue his scheme with impunity. I was not surprised when Holmes suggested that I should take my revolver with me. He had himself picked up the loaded hunting crop, which was his favorite weapon. A 4-wheeler was at the door at 11, and in it we drove to a spot at the other side of Hammersmith Bridge. Here the cabman was directed to wait. A short walk brought us to a secluded road fringed with pleasant houses, each standing in its own grounds. In the light of a street lamp, we read "The Burnham Villa" upon the gatepost of one of them. The occupants had evidently retired to rest, for all was dark, save for a fanlight over the hall door, which shed a single blurred circle onto the garden path. The wooden fence which separated the grounds from the road threw a dense black shadow upon the inner side, and here it was that we crouched.
I fear that you'll have a long wait. We may thank our stars that it is not raining. I don't think we can even venture to smoke to pass the time. However, it's a 2-1 chance that we get something to pay us for our trouble.
It proved, however, that our vigil was not to be so long as Holmes had led us to fear, and it ended in a very sudden and singular fashion. In an instant, without the least sound to warn us of its coming, the garden gate swung open, and a lithe, dark figure, as swift and active as an ape, rushed up the garden path. We saw it whisk past the light thrown from over the door and disappear against the black shadow of the house. There was a long pause during which we held our breath, and then a very gentle creaking sound came to our ears. The window was being opened. The noise ceased, and again there was a long silence. The fellow was making his way into the house. We saw the sudden flash of a dark lantern inside the room. What he sought was evidently not there, for again we saw the flash through another blind, and then through another.
Hey, let's get him to the open window. We'll nab him as he comes out.
But before we could move, the man had emerged again. As he came out into the glimmering patch of light, we saw that he carried something white under his arm, and he looked stealthy all round him. The silence of the deserted street reassured him. Turning his back upon us, he laid down his burden, and the next instant there was a sharp tap, followed by a clatter and a rattle. The man was so intent upon what he was doing that he never heard our steps as we stole across the grass plot. With the bound of a tiger, Holmes was on his back, and an instant later Lestrade and I had him by either wrist, and the handcuffs had been fastened. As we turned him over, I saw a hideous, sallow face with writhing, furious features glaring up at us, and I knew that it was indeed the man of the photograph who we had secured. But it was not our prisoner to whom Holmes was giving his attention. Squatted on the doorstep, he was engaged in most carefully examining that which the man had brought from the house. It was a bust of Napoleon, like the one which we had seen that morning, and it had been broken into similar fragments. Carefully, Holmes held each separate shard to the light, but in no way did it differ from any other shattered piece of plaster. He had just completed his examination when the hall lights flew up. The door opened, and the owner of the house, a jovial, rotund figure in shirt and trousers, presented himself.
Mr. Josiah Brown, I suppose?
Yes, sir, and you no doubt are Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I had the note which you sent by the express messenger, and I did exactly what you told me. We locked every door on the inside and awaited developments. Well, I'm very glad to see that you have got the rascal. I hope, gentlemen, that you will come in and have some refreshment.
However, Lestrade was anxious to get his man into safe quarters, so within a few minutes our car had been summoned, and we were all four upon our way to London. Not a word would our captive say, but he glared at us from the shadow of his matted hair, and once, when my hand seemed within his reach, he snapped at it like a hungry wolf. We stayed long enough at the police station to learn that a search of his clothing revealed nothing save a few shillings and a long sheath knife, the handle of which bore copious traces of recent blood.
That's all right. Ill knows of these gentry. Ill knows all of these gentry. You will give a name to him, and you will find my theory of the mafia will work out all right. Now, I'm sure I'm exceedingly obliged to you, Mr. Holmes, for the workmanlike way in which you've laid hands upon him. Now, but I don't quite understand it all.
I fear it is rather too late now for explanations. Plus, besides, there are on 1 or 2 details which are not finished off, and it is one of those cases which are worth working out to the very end. If you will come round once more to my rooms at 6 o'clock tomorrow, I think I shall be able to show you that even now you have not grasped the entire meaning of this business, which presents some features which might make it absolutely original in the history of crime. If ever I permit you to chronicle any more of my little problems, Watson, I foresee that you will enliven your pages by an account of the singular adventure of the Napoleonic busts.
When we met again next evening, Lestrade was furnished with much information concerning our prisoner. His name, it appeared, was Beppo, second name unknown. He was a well-known ne'er-do-well among the Italian colony. He had once been a skillful sculptor and had earned an honest living, but he had taken to evil courses and had twice already been in jail, once for a petty theft, and once, as we had already heard, for stabbing a fellow countryman. He could talk English perfectly well. His reasons for destroying the bust were still unknown, and he refused to answer any questions upon the subject. But the police had discovered that those same busts might very well have been made by his own hands, since he was engaged in this class of work at the establishment of Gelder & Co. To all this information, much of which we already knew, Holmes listened with polite attention. But I, who knew him so well, could clearly see that his thoughts were elsewhere, and I detected a mixture of mingled uneasiness and expectation beneath that mask which he was wont to assume. At last he started in his chair, and his eyes brightened. There had been a ring at the bell. A minute later we heard steps upon the stairs, and an elderly red-faced man with grizzled side whiskers was ushered in. In his right hand he carried an old-fashioned carpet bag, which he placed upon the table.
Is Mr. Sherlock Holmes here?
Mr. Sandford of Reading, I suppose.
Yes, sir. I fear I'm a little late, but the trains were awkward. You wrote to me about a bust that is in my possession.
Exactly.
I have your letter here. You said, I desire to possess a copy of Divine's Napoleon, and I'm prepared to pay you £10 for the one that is in your possession. Is this right?
Certainly.
I was very much surprised at your letter, for I could not imagine how you knew I owned such a thing.
Of course you must have been surprised, but the explanation is
Holmes is busy donning one of his many famous disguises. Poor Christie. She's back. Your disguise is
Of course you must have
amazing,
been
Holmes.
But the explanation is very simple. Mr. Harding of Harding Brothers said that they had sold you their last copy, and he gave me your address.
Oh, that was it, was it? Did he tell you what I paid for it?
No, he did not.
Well, I am an honest man, though not a very rich one. I gave only 15 shillings for the bust, and I think you ought to know that before I take the £10 from you.
I am sure the scruple does you honor, Mr. Sandford, but I have named that price, so I intend to stick to it.
Well, that is very handsome of you, Mr. Holmes. I brought the bust with me, as you asked me to do so. Here it is.
He opened his bag, and at last we saw placed upon our table a complete specimen of that bust which we had already seen more than once in fragments. Holmes took a paper from his pocket and laid a £10 note upon the table.
You will kindly sign that paper, Mr. Sandford, in the presence of these witnesses. It is simply to say that you transfer every possible right that you ever had in the bust to me. I am a methodical man, you see, and you never know what turn events might take afterwards. Thank you, Mr. Sandford. Here is your money. I wish you a very good evening.
When our visitor had disappeared, Sherlock Holmes' movements were such as to rivet our attention. He began by taking a clean white cloth from a drawer and laying it over the table. Then he placed his newly acquired bust in the center of the cloth. Finally, he picked up his hunting crop and struck Napoleon a sharp blow on top of the head. The figure broke into fragments, and Holmes bent eagerly over the shattered remains. Next instant, with a loud shout of triumph, he held up one splinter, in which a round, dark object was fixed like a plum in a pudding. Holmes is changing into yet another cunning disguise. A round, dark object which was fixed like a plum in a pudding.
Gentlemen, let me introduce you to the famous Black Pearl of the Borgia.
Lestrade and I sat silent for a moment, and then with spontaneous impulse we both broke at clapping, as at the well-wrought crisis of a play. A flush of colour sprang to Holmes' pale cheeks, and he bowed to us like the master dramatist who receives the homage of his audience. It was at such moments that for an instant he ceased to be a reasoning machine and betrayed his human love for admiration and applause. The same singularly proud and reserved nature which turned away with disdain from popular notoriety was capable of being moved to its depths by spontaneous wonder and praise from a friend.
Yes, gentlemen, it is the most famous pearl now existing in the world, and it has been my good fortune by a connected chain of inductive reasoning to trace it from the Prince of Colonna's bedroom at the Darker Hotel, where it was lost, to the interior of this, the last of the 6 busts of Napoleon, which were manufactured by Gelder & Co. of Stepney. You will remember, Lestrade, the sensation caused by the disappearance of this valuable jewel and the vain efforts of the London police to recover it. I was myself consulted upon the case.
Holmes was also consulted upon the case, but was unable to throw any light upon it. Suspicion fell upon the maid of the princess, who was an Italian, and it was proved that she had a brother in London, but we failed to trace any connection between them.
The maid's name was Lucretia Venucci, and there is no doubt in my mind that this Pietro who was murdered 2 nights ago was the brother. I have been looking up the dates in the old files of the paper, and I find that the exam of Beppo for some crime of violence, event which took place in the factory of Gelder & Co. at the very moment when these busts were being made. Now you clearly see the sequence of events, though you see them, of course, in the inverse order to the way in which they presented themselves to me. Beppo had the pearl in his possession. He may have stolen it from Pietro. He may have been Pietro's confederate, but he may have been the go-between of Pietro and his sister. It is of no consequence to us which is the correct solution. The main fact is that he had the pearl, and at that moment when it was on his person, he was pursued by the police. He made for the factory in which he worked, and he knew that he had only a few minutes in which to conceal this enormously valuable prize, which would otherwise be found on him when he was searched. 6 plaster casts of Napoleon were drying in the passage. One of them was still soft. In an instant, Beppo, a skillful workman, made a smaller hole in the wet plaster, dropping in the pearl, and with a few touches covered over the aperture once more. It was an admirable hiding place. No one could possibly find it. But Beppo was condemned to a year's imprisonment, and in the meanwhile his 6 busts were scattered over London. He could not tell which contained his treasure. Only by breaking them could he see. Even shaking would tell him nothing, for as the plaster was wet, it was probable that the pearl would adhere to it, as in fact it has done. Beppo did not despair, and he conducted his search with considerable ingenuity and perseverance. Through a cousin who works with Gelder, he found out the retail firms who had bought the busts. He managed to find employment with Morse Hudson, and in that way tracked down 3 of them. The pearl was not there. Then, with the help of some Italian employee, he succeeded in finding out where the other 3 busts had gone. The first was at Harker's. There, he was dogged by his confederate, who held Beppo responsible for the loss of the pearl, and he stabbed him in the scuffle which followed.
If he was his confederate, why should he carry his photograph?
As a means of tracing him, if he wished to inquire about him from any third person. That was the obvious reason. Well, after the murder, I calculated that Beppo would probably hurry rather than delay his movements. He would fear that the police would read his secret, and so he hastened on before they should get ahead of him. Of course, I could not say that he had not found the pearl in Harker's bust. I had not even concluded for certain that it was the pearl. But it was evident to me that he was looking for something. since he carried the bust past the other houses in order to break it in the garden, which had a lamp overlooking it. Since Harker's bust was one in the three, the chances were exactly as I told you, 2-1 against the pearl being inside it. There remained 2 busts, and it was obvious that he would go for the London one first. I warned the inmates of the house, so as to avoid a second tragedy, and we went down with the happiest results. But that time, of course, I knew for certain that it was the Borgia pearl that we were after. The name of the murdered man linked the one event with the other. There only remained a single bust, the Reading one, and the pearl must be there. I bought it in your presence from the owner, and there it lies.
We sat in silence for a moment.
Well, I've seen you handle a good many cases, Mr. Holmes, but I don't know that I ever knew a more workmanlike one than that. We're not jealous of you. We're not jealous of you at Scotland Yard. No, sir. We're very proud of you. And if you come down tomorrow, there's not a man from the oldest inspector to the youngest constable who wouldn't be glad to shake you by the hand.
Thank you, thank you.
As he turned away, it seemed to me that he was more nearly moved by the softest human emotions I had ever seen. A moment later, he was the cold and practical thinker once more.
Put the pearl in the safe, Watson, and get out the papers of the Conker-Singleton forgery case. Goodbye, Lestrade. If any little problem comes your way, I shall be happy, if I can, to give you a hint or two as to its solution.
Thank you.
Yay.
Thanks for bearing with my internet. That was a rough one, but I appreciate all of you. You guys handled it great. That was fantastic. You all were like so wonderful. It's just so much fun acting with all of you. Isn't it great to do like a classic like this together? It's fun.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
It
was
was
so much fun.
Yeah, it was really
It
fun.
really was. Yeah, I wasn't sure when when you kept losing you, Christie, whether you were going to get back.
If I had thought faster, I would have said, thank you, Watson.
I started off saying, oh, I'll just do this as an American, and then my brain just clicked.
I know I couldn't get the accent at first, so I was just like, it took me a while, but at least I got something there. I was trying to do Basil. I don't do a very good Rathbone, but I did try.
I
You
like
were
your Basil.
fantastic, Christie.
I have his mug though.
But Holmes never had to deal with internet issues.
That's
Very
Oh my
true.
god, right? Amber, I know. He would never solve anything.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming,
Oh.
everyone.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for having us.
Had a
That
great
was so
time.
good.
Really fun.
So before we close the show, I'd like to thank our guests once more, Anne Charles, Ian Lasky, Jason Shannon for being on the show and their wonderful, wonderful performances, despite all of our internet connections, which were many this time. So next month on Fun Classic Reads, September brings with it Banned Book Week.
Ooh.
A celebration of the freedom to read. So we're planning to do a special banned book episode where we read a classic that was banned. As Christie is Mr. Holmes, would you care to give us any clues? She's still there. Any clues, Christie? No, she's
No.
gone.
There's
I
the
think you
clue.
lost her.
There's
Yeah.
a clue.
Uh,
I guess it's still banned because they're cutting her out of the internet.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I think they're the ones that are making her cut out. You know.
Yeah.
Could be. So anyway, it will be spicy and controversial.
mm.
and I'm sure that it will surprise many, many people. But like all good mysteries, we're not going to tell you what it is.
Hmm.
So that's it for tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. If anyone wants to be a guest in the future, please reach out to either Christie or myself, or you can fill in the form linked at the end of the video. Also, we believe that all books are classics. So if you're an author and would like to see one of your books given the Fun Classic Reads treatment, again, feel free to contact us. Thank you. And until next time, take care and good night.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.